Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first edition of SCM Live. In the next half hour, we're going to go on a wild and wacky trip through the collector car market. I'm Keith Martin, the publisher of Sports Car Market, and I will be your host today. SCM has always focused on auction reporting. SCM Live is no different. Today, our experts have each picked two cars that are currently for sale on Bring a Trailer. They will explain why they picked these cars and what they think the hammer price will be. At the end, you'll get to vote for the expert you think is closest to the mark. If you wish to submit questions during SCM Live, use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Due to the number of people watching today, we may not get to your questions today. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the team that has made this show possible. They are Jim Pickering, the manager of Sports Car Market, the managing editor of Sports Car Market, and Brian Baker, our IT manager and also our expert on Japanese car, who has a monthly column, The Rising Sun, and who is also responsible for my buying an AutoZam, which I tried to drive from Portland, Oregon to Monterey. And we got about halfway there before we realized that going 75 miles an hour for 700 miles was not the forte of these cars. I'd like to thank today's sponsors: Bruce and Spencer Trenery of Fantasy Junction, Bill Noon at Symbolic Motors, and David and Linda Wilson at Intercity Lines. David and Linda have been sponsors and friends of Sports Car Market right from the very beginning. Here's today's SCM subscription special, which you can share with your friends. If you go to www.sportscarmarket.com/Zoom, you'll find an exclusive 20% discount on our print and digital package. That also includes 1 year of back issues. You get all this for just $52 a year. That's $4.33 a month, which is less than a latte. This offer expires Friday at midnight. That's www.sportscarmarket.com/Zoom. Renew your subscription or buy one for a friend. Now let's meet today's experts. First, Philip Richter, who is based in Wellington, Florida. He's an SCM contributor and writes the online journal Turtle Garage. He still owns the Honda 50 that sparked his love of nimble motorized things. He collects vintage BMW motorcycles and German cars. He is treasurer of the United States Equestrian Team Foundation and president of Hollowbrook Wealth Management, LLC, a New York-based private investment firm. Steve Serio is the president and owner of the Bond Group, Aston Martin of New England Lotus Motorsports, Inc. in Waltham, Massachusetts. Though for the most part, vintage European cars are where his heart is. Serio blames his dad for this because he brought home so many Matchbox cars during his formative years. His need to overindulge in vintage European cars of the 50s through the 90s inevitably leads to coveting one or more car. Recent garage inhabitants include a pair of Porsche 356A Speedsters, a 911 Sport Classic, and a 914-6, along with the Mercedes-Benz 500E, a 1983 VW Callaway Rabbit GTI, a VW Thing, and a recently acquired Aston Martin Vanquish Zagato shooting brake. Jeff Zerschmied comes by his devotion to sports cars honestly, as opposed to the rest of us, I guess, who were dishonest. Some of his earliest memories are of riding around under the hatch of a 1970 240Z while his parents competed in Friday night road rallies. He's a veteran of SCCA club racing, stock car racing, performance rally, and the Alcan 500 Winter Rally. He's also an author. He's the author of Subaru High Performance Builder's Guide and Automotive Welding, a Practical Guide, both published by CarTech Books. Recently, he took the helm of The Star. That's the Mercedes-Benz Club of America's magazine. Let's start with Philip. Philip, let's look at the market segment of $50,000 to $250,000. What's your one-word description of that?
Keith, that's for me?
Yeah.
I would say right now, under 50,000 segment is white hot. And you're seeing that on Bring a Trailer every day.
Why do you say that?
I think the activity level is very high. I think the enthusiasm level is very high of these bidders. It's not just two people bidding for a car in that price range. It's a lot of bidders. a lot of commentary, a lot of interest in certain cars in that price category. Very positive outcome right now, I think.
Do you think that the prices are generally higher than they were 6 months ago?
Yes, in that category, I do.
Steve, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good entry point, and everybody was taking a step back in March and April, and they're absolutely, having bought a couple of cars for myself on Bring a Trailer, I know I'm not the only one bidding, and watching it every day, it's very enthusiastic, and the caveat is the right cars are getting a lot of bidders, and cars that are, let's say, less than stellar are getting punished. I mean, they're bringing what they bring, or they're the occasional. I think their sale-through rate's about 77% a day, and I think the 23% that's not selling are things that are unrealistic reserves, are just not great cars. They're not going, they're not living to the salt water test.
Philip, I apologize. I jumped ahead there. I was going to start with Jeff for the under 50,000. Let me see what Jeff has to say about that. Jeff?
Well, I don't disagree with Philip or Stephen. My word for the cars up to 50K is vigorous. We're seeing a lot of action. We're seeing a lot of great cars come through, and I think there's some great values to be had there.
Wouldn't you say that there are more, like in these cheap cars, there are more good ones for sale than ever before?
Yeah, they are coming out of the woodwork. And I think that in large part, that's because the in-person auctions, if I was going to sell one of those cars, I might have been tempted to put it in the Mecum auction when it came to Portland. That's not happening this year. So where am I selling my car? I'm going to sell it at Bring a Trailer.
I know for me with my Alphas, 10 years ago, when I wanted a GTV or a Bertone Sprint, I had to build one because good ones didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And now, if you have a little patience, they'll show up on Bring a Trailer. You think, yes, Steve?
Yeah, I think what it is it's a universal. It's a little bit of people aping other people's success, and why not? I mean, if you see something bring a lot of money that you didn't normally think that, it's cars that may have languished. You're getting a lot of other guys jumping on board going, hey, wait a minute, I've got this in my garage. I might as well finish the project, do it well, and have at it, because the results are, they're speaking for themselves.
So, Philip, let's come back to you. The segment that I wanted you to actually talk about was $50,000 to $250,000, which is, that's not entry level. What do you think about what's going on in that world?
I think if I were to define that market segment, Keith, the defining word I'd use is selective. I think buyers in that, over six-figure category, up to 250,000, are very selective. They want rarity, they want condition, they want low mileage, they want provenance, they don't want paintwork. They're very selective buyers.
If it's missing any one of those things, does it make the price tumble?
Not necessarily tumble. Like, a good example is sometimes cars with ultra low mileage are not in good condition. Sometimes cars with more mileage are actually, they've been maintained, they've been lovingly driven, they're machines, they need to work. So, just because a car has high mileage doesn't mean it can't ring the bell. But when you get into, accident histories or poor ownership records or no real provenance, we don't know where the car was for the last 10 years, more and more. And I think Bring a Trailer really should be credited with bringing this out in the transparent process that allows all bidders, participants, and stakeholders to comment on cars. Some of the comments are knowledgeable, some are not, but it's not any one thing that would bring a car down.
Jeff, how big a deal is it if you think that a car does not have a clean Carfax?
I think it's a huge deal. I think that's the difference between buying with confidence and or as much confidence as one can realistically have, and figuring that you're going to be dealing with repairs of unknown quality. Especially, you know, with these online auctions, you know, it's all pretty much remote. It's pretty rare that you can go and see the car and crawl around underneath it yourself. You're basing everything on photos and records. So I think an unclean Carfax is a big deal.
Steve, let's go to the last market segment. I call it $250,000 to infinity. Where do you think, how would you describe that part of the market in one word?
Awakened. I think everybody was optimistically cautious when this sort of slowdown happened. I think the byproduct of people not being able to travel and people not being able to go to their favorite event brought a lot of psychological, because these guys can afford these $250 to $15 million cars, 250,000 to 15 million, have never been locked into one place this long in their entire professional careers. And I think the knock-on effect was, hey, you know, life is short. There's a lot of things that are going on right now in the world that are completely unplanned, unexpected. You know, the great joke is if you had asked somebody in 2015, hey, where are you going to be in 5 years from now? Everybody would have got the answer wrong. Nobody would have predicted this. And I think, I mean, I'm seeing a lot of cars that were on the market for a long time, finding new owners, and I'm seeing, you know, strong prices, either personally or with colleagues, on everything from a McLaren F1 downward to, you know, a couple $1 million. There's great activity in that market.
So let's move on now. I've had each of you pick two cars. We're going to do this in 2 rounds. We're going to go one car at a time, one person at a time. We'll talk about why you picked them, the value side, and then have you predict what you think the car will actually sell for. We'll start with Philip. So what have we got, Philip?
So this is a 97 Ferrari 550 Maranello that's currently listed on Bring a Trailer. The Maranello has the holy trinity of Ferrari attributes. It's designed by Pininfarina. It has a V12, and it's blessed with the signature Ferrari gated 6-speed manual. This car checks most of the boxes. Low mileage, it has 6,000 miles. It appears to be in good to actually excellent condition cosmetically. And you can't really go wrong with Rosa Corsa on tan interior. I personally prefer the fact the car doesn't have the shields on the fenders. I think it's a cleaner look. On the downside, and what might hold this car back a little bit in the auction, is the fact that its belt service was last done in 2012. So that's about a $10,000 to $12,000 service on the car. But as Ferrari 550 Maranellos go, they're fairly reliable, they're easy to own, and they're great to drive. And unlike most Ferraris, the majority of 550s were driven and used and enjoyed by their original owners. I mean, ask anyone who's ever owned one of these cars and they will tell you they regret selling it. It's a great driver's car and it's quite modern. So, Keith, I think this car normally would do around 175. I think it's going to be held back by the service, probably going to sell at 165.
What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think they are very usable cars, and you know, looking back over the last decade, they were a sweet spot car, and most people looking at those cars prefer the 550 in my world over the 575 or the 599 in some cases. I think it's just one of those things. They just nailed it. I mean, they just nailed it. And you get one in a good color, you get one in a nart blue or you know, some odd color that's not red, white, or yellow. And it helps. It really helps a lot. And I think there's a robust audience for that car. I think Philip's, you know, pretty much dead on.
What do you think, Jeff?
I'll go ahead and be a little contrarian. I think this one might go closer to the median, just because of economic uncertainty right now.
So, Steve, when I was recently looking at a 456, you said that when one of those comes into your dealership, it makes your service manager smile because he knows he'll be busy for a while. Would you say the same thing about a 550 Maranello?
No, just the opposite. You've got two polar opposite cars that were built at the same time. Apparently, one set of Italians was sober and the other set was drunk when they were building the cars. Because 456, if it comes in under its own power, and please send all the hate mail to Keith about this, attention me, it's just the opposite, and it shows in the pricing. 456 is a beautiful car, and I admit to having coveted it when it came out. And then all you had to do was know somebody that owned one and how miserable they were trying to keep it going. So I think the 550 shares nothing other than the badge.
Steve, would a Daytona and a 550 Maranello make a nice matched pair?
Yeah, perfect. It's a lovely garage, something that vintage classic you could use for events and something you could use for a daily driver. That's a great garage. It's a great two-car Ferrari garage.
Let's move to the next pick. Steve, here you are. What have we got here?
My 250 PF Coupe.
This is a car that you own.
Come up on the screen. So
yeah, this is a car that you own.
Yes, we took the car in trade on a 904 Porsche coupled with a Rolls-Royce Mulliner Drophead Cloud 1 about a month ago, and this became for me a little bit of an experiment with Bring a Trailer. I didn't want to wait till August to deal with the auction companies, to try to get this car in with either Bonhams or RM or Gooding. And it's a car that has over $900,000 worth of receipts in the restoration. Last traded hands at Amelia Island a couple of years ago for $720,000. And we thought, you know what? Cars that are without exception and are well presented, I think the comment folks on Bring a Trailer generally love. There hasn't been one that's been sold at this level, but they're getting into high dollar cars. I mean, a Mura S, I think it was an S, not an S. An S sold, or maybe it might have been a P400 last couple of weeks ago for $990. A 722 McLaren Benz did $700,000. I mean, they're getting into the higher priced cars, and we sold an L Series Dino about 2 months ago now for $390,000, and thought, okay, if they can do this, they should be able to do, a motion product restoration 250 and knock the ball out of the park.
Where do you think this car will end up, Steve?
Well, it's not going to do the 720 it did a couple of years ago at auction. The market isn't what it was then, and I think if we get into the 575 to 6.25 range, I think that'll show the market correction. And I think having talked to a handful of people that are calling and then making times to come and visit to actually see the car and drive it, I think it'll do really well.
But still, if it sells in the fives and it last traded hands for 7 something, somebody's taking a $200,000 haircut here.
Yes, the guy who traded the car to me, because he's going to take the same haircut he took on the Rolls Royce, because he bought the Rolls for $420,000 and then put $300,000 into a fully restored car, color changing it. And that Rolls is a 5.25 car, so he had to be a big boy. And like anybody who buys something at auction and then within 24 months decides to sell it, hey, guess what? The market may have moved and nobody's giving you retail for a car like that again that quickly. So the last guy had to sort of suffer the consequences.
Let's talk to Jeff now. What's your pick?
Okay, so I picked this because I have a thing for 2CVs. I want to own one someday. And this one was right here in Portland, Oregon. These cars are remarkable. They prototyped them in the 30s, and you can sort of see that in the bodywork. They were actually manufactured after the war, starting in 1948, and they went on to be manufactured until 1990 and made 9 million of them. And they were, they're sort of the sine qua non of the French automobile. It's worth noting that your 0 to 60 time was infinity until 1970 on these cars. They wouldn't do 60 miles an hour. But I have a thing for funky old cars like this, and so I picked this one. And this one is very interesting. It's listed. It's a 1985 is its actual year of manufacture. If you read the background on the BAT auction, it's being sold as a 1965 because that was what they had to do to get it imported into the United States. It's got some rust penetration in the floorboards, and there are photos of that. They've been, legit put the photos up. They've cleaned up the rust and painted it over, but they didn't fix the rust. They didn't weld in any new metal. Let me see what we're currently sitting at, because these have been the prices have been changing while we've been talking. Currently sitting at $8,888 bid. I think it's going to go about 10K. The range on 2CVs is 7,500 to 20,000 on Bring a Trailer lately. I don't think this is going to make it to the top of that range because of that rust that is still there, and because of the gray market aspect with the VIN not matching what the car actually is. But I think as long as you keep this car out of concourses and other places where people care about the details, it's a fun driver. You take this to Cars and Coffee, everybody will swoon over it. It's got a nice shiny paint job, and it'll be a lot of fun to own and drive.
Jeff, would you advise the new owner to leave the car alone and not try to fix the rust?
I could go either way on that. Because we're not talking about an unmolested original, this has clearly been repainted. I'm not sure Citroen ever put that good of a paint job on one of these at the factory. You're certainly not spoiling anything by doing the repair. On the other hand, you could just drive it and enjoy it, especially if you do pick it up for around 10 grand. Driving it, there's certainly nothing wrong with driving and enjoying it.
So let's go to the second round. We'll start with Philip. Philip, I know you and Steve both have soft spots in your heart for these cars. We alpha guys look at these and say, oh, look, a little 3 Series with a Faco wing and fat fenders.
Well, it's much more than that, Keith. And in full disclosure, I'm sort of talking my own book because I own one of these cars. But the E30 M3 is an iconic post-war BMW. It raced in the DTM class as a homologation car against the...
We lose you, Philip? We'll wait a second here and see if we get Philip's connection back. While we wait, Steve, maybe you can pick up there on the M3 what makes it special.
Well, it's one of those well-built, again, sweet spot things that came after the M5, which I prefer as a bigger 4-door, a little closely more related to the M1. But the M3 was a car for a generation. I think there's a whole generation of guys that, that was a relatively low production for the world. I think 5,000 for the United States, 5,000 for the rest of the world. And try to go find one. I mean, it's one of those things that there's plenty of them for sale, and they've all got 150,000 miles on them, have been, repainted and properly driven, and had to get, these things and those things repaired. And if you're finding a really low mileage one in a great color combination, it really is harder to find sometimes cars that were meant to be just transportation in low mileage conditions. Because, you think about the period, nobody was buying one of, well, this guy apparently didn't, maybe a handful of other people, but not very many people were going to the BMW dealership only to put this car in a garage and use it as a collectible. And it's not everybody's taste with the fenders and the wing, but I think it's aged really, really well. It aged better than the similar offering from Mercedes-Benz, and they're bulletproof.
How many miles on this?
You have to ask Philip.
Okay.
That one's, I think, in the teens.
Okay, and
which is low.
What do you think it'll go for, Steve?
Again, this I didn't study the way Philip did. But we were talking about, the other day about one having, gone well over 100. And I'm not shocked. So would have to see.
Would you pay six figures for an M3?
I wouldn't, but I did pay close to $40,000 for a VW GTI with a Callaway turbo. So it's the same math. It's just the BMW is 2 or 3 times the car the VW is, and I get it. It's not on my bucket list, but if I think I'd be more tempted at an M5 because it would look great next to my 500e, because you're going into that period of big grand touring 4-door. Those are the 2 cars. You're either going to have one or the other. Or if you have, if you want a sedan garage, I think a first gen M5 and the 500e make a great pair.
So let's move on to your pick, Steve. What do we have here?
We've got a 19. I'm going to look over my shoulder and see where this is right now. Yeah, it hasn't moved in the last couple of days. I've got the 328 Ferrari. 1988, and I picked it as a little bit of a science project in the opposite way I'm trying to sell the 250 PF Coupe. This is kind of just a car. I think 328s fit a sweet spot between a 308 and a 348. I think it's the most robust built. I think the best looking of that whole crew of cars. I love them. From 86 to 89, they really made a great car. I'd have an off-colored car as a GTB in a heartbeat. It doesn't take much to maintain them. They're unlike the car before it and unlike the car after it. But this car is a curious thing, and it proves how to screw something up on bat, because it's red, it's not the best year, it's relatively high mileage. It should have an audience. It should have a home. My guess would be at $57.5, maybe $60,000. But the seller is out to lunch. He hasn't answered any questions. He hasn't provided enough pictures. He hasn't gone through any great service records. And this is how to fail at Bring a Trailer. So I'm going to say the car, it's bid now to 46.5, and reading the comments, I think the guy who bid 46.5 and then asked a bunch of questions that aren't getting answered, unless this guy comes to life in the next 24 hours, this car isn't going to move off 46.5, and it won't get to the 57 that it should sell at, primarily because the owner just put it up like, he put it up in a want ad somewhere and just went, okay, either you guys are going to hit my number or not. And maybe he's just cleaning out his garage and doesn't care, and maybe if it were a no reserve thing, it'd be the deal of the week. But I think it's going to die on the vine because of poor presentation.
Would you be a buyer in the mid 40s?
No, because he's not answering the questions.
And what kind of
it could be a $20,000 service on that car, between a major service, tires. I don't know if the car's had paint work. I think the interior has been retrimmed. I can't tell, and he won't answer. So I don't buy anything without great communication, whether it's coincidentally the 2CV that's about to get traded to us on a DB11 Volante, didn't make that up, or a $7 million one-off Ferrari that we just sold through here. And the communication with, 500 pictures and service records back, almost 2 decades, you got to do your homework. And this guy's not letting anybody do their homework.
How big a deal is it, do you think, to have a responsive seller?
It's enormous. It's worse than having a bad Carfax if you don't have a seller who just doesn't deal with. Let's look at both sides of this. The peanut gallery on Bring It Trailer, you have to take seriously, because if you anger them, they'll destroy your car. And you have to be nice to these guys who make a hobby of commenting on everything, because they're driving the auctions every day. And then you ultimately get to the serious guys who are going to be bidding. And you have to treat both of them with respect, because if you don't answer the guys who are asking the ridiculous questions that they could have answered if they just read, up above in the comments that you list the car at, you still have to answer every single one of them. Or if you anger the mob, they'll tank your sale.
Let's go, Jeff. What is your pick here?
Okay, this was really another pick from the heart. I have a '72 Fiat Sports Spider, just like this, same color even, and so this one very much interested me. These cars were made from 1966, imported to the U.S. starting in 1968, went all the way to about 85. The last few years as not even under the Fiat brand. But the thing about a Fiat 124 is it's one of the big four, right? Of MGBs, Alpha Spiders, Triumph Spitfires, and Fiat 124s. Most car guys have owned at least one of those four, and if you're like me, 3 out of the 4 in the course of their lives. And these cars are well loved. They made a ton of them, sold them over here. They're not hard to find. You can find one on Craigslist. God help you if you do. And this is a really good one. You know, everything that they showed, all the photos and everything else. This is the early Fiat Spider that you want to own. And so SCM rates a median of about 8,500 on this. Recent sales on Bring a Trailer can top $20,000 for a really good one. Although, and the highest prices tend to be the later cars, your 2 liters, which have more torque, but are a little emissions strangled, in my opinion. This is an early car, 1600 engine, great high revving engine. It is as we discussed between the two of us, you know, it's you could choose the Miata if you wanted the Momentum sports car, or you could choose this if you didn't want all that boring reliability of a Miata. But I think this one's going to land around 12K because it is clean, it's nice. This is the one you want, and it's going to be affordable.
Would you think it would bring more if it were a 2-liter car?
You know, that seems to be the way that it goes, and honestly, that puzzles me because I love the early small bumper, no hood bumps 124 Sport Spiders. They are, I think, a much more lively car with the smaller displacement, the 1400 and 1600 engines. This one's got 51,000 miles showing on the odometer. With one of these, that's, you know, it could be 50,000. That's perfectly reasonable. It could also be 150. That would also be believable. Looking at this one, I think you can see that it's been well kept and cared for all of its life.
So, Jeff, let me ask you a question. What would cause somebody to spend $10,000 for this vintage sports car as opposed to a very low miles Miata for the same price?
I think because you want the Italian experience, something that's not just another car on the road, something that's going to get some attention, as opposed to just another Miata going down the road.
Okay, well, that wraps it up for the round 1 and round 2. Can we see the poll now? Brian, can you or Jim, can you pop that up for us? And so this is your chance to vote right now who you think has made the most accurate predictions. Zoom is very clever because they stick this poll right in front of you and it won't go away until you vote. So we'll just wait. While we're waiting for the polling to be complete here, I'd just like to remind you that of the Sports Car Market subscription special. You go to sportscarmarket.com/Zoom and you get a 25% discount on your print and digital subscriptions. That makes it just $4.33 a month. And that offer is good until midnight on Friday, and you can pass it along to your friends. That's sportscarmarket.com/Zoom. I'd like to say thanks again to our sponsors, Fantasy Junction, Symbolic Motors, and Intercity Lines, to Jim Pickering and Brian Baker, and to our panelists, Philip Richter, Steve Serio, and Jeff Zerschmied. This edition of SCM Live has been recorded and will be posted on YouTube in a few days. At the moment, it looks like Steve Serio is in the lead for the online Oracle. We will report back next week. we'll report back next week to see how their predictions sized up with the actual hammer prices. That wraps it up for today. Thanks for joining us. See you next week at the same time in the same place. Best wishes for your thoughtful, informed collecting. And I'm Keith Martin, and I've enjoyed being your host today.